The email, it landed in his inbox late that afternoon. Just a short, stiff note from the producers of the Morning Exchange. You know, one of those shows everyone's grandma watches. They wanted Darius Bell, the Darius Bell, CEO of Innovis, on their show. A segment about diversity in business. Darius had seen this movie before. A sudden burst of interest in black entrepreneurs, a few minutes of polite applause, then, poof, back to obscurity. But this felt different. Innovis wasn't some scrappy little startup anymore. They just snagged a massive defense contract, beating out the big boys. 20 years. 20 years of grinding, of proving himself, had led to this. Still, a knot of unease twisted in his gut. Something felt off. Tasha, his assistant, always sharp as a tack, picked up on it immediately. You sure about this, D? These shows, they love a good story, but they really love a takedown. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking softly. I'll handle it, he said, more to convince himself than her. It's national exposure. Let's see what they've got. Tasha just shook her head, a small, knowing exhale. Just don't let them bait you. He nodded, but that knot in his stomach? It tightened. He knew the game. If this was a setup, they were messing with the wrong guy. The morning of the interview, KXNT Studios felt sterile. Cold, almost. The green room air was thick with the scent of hairspray and something vaguely chemical. A young producer, barely glancing up from her clipboard, ushered him in. Mr. Bell, thanks for being here. Mic you up in 5. No small talk, no warmth. Just a transaction. Sitting in the makeup chair, an assistant dusting his face with practiced indifference, he watched the monitor. Celebrity scandals, a cooking demo, then, the dreaded transition card. Coming up next, the black tech boom. Is it talent or special treatment? Darius's jaw clenched. So that was their angle. Predictable. But if they thought they had the upper hand, they were in for a rude awakening. He just didn't know how rude. The set of the Morning Exchange was designed to be cozy. Soft blues, golds, a glass coffee table. Cameras hovered like silent vultures. He adjusted his suit jacket, taking his seat across from Madeline Royce. The queen bee of daytime TV, known for her tough questions. She smiled, but it was all teeth, no warmth. Darius Bell, she purred, her voice smooth as silk. CEO of Innovis. A true American success story. He gave a polite nod. Appreciate you having me. She leaned in, flipping through her cue cards, the script of his impending doom, probably. Now let's get right into it. Your company recently landed a $200 million government contract. Impressive. He knew this dance. Build him up, then, the takedown. It was a long process, he said, his voice even. We put in the work. We developed a better system. Simple as that. Some have called it groundbreaking, she said, a subtle pause, a pregnant silence. But others have raised questions. Here it comes. She picked up a card, reading aloud, her voice dripping with full concern. Some industry experts say Innovis benefited from certain federal diversity incentives, that perhaps this wasn't just about being the best, but about meeting a quota. There it was. The real reason he was there. The insinuation. The smear. Darius let a beat pass. I've heard that argument before, he said, his voice surprisingly calm. It's funny, though, when a black entrepreneur wins, it's special treatment. When a legacy firm, run by the same families for generations, lands those deals, nobody bats an eye. The air in the studio shifted. You could feel it. The producers off camera were exchanging glances. Madeline held her ground. So you're saying race played no role at all in your success? Darius chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Let me ask you this. When SpaceX won its NASA contracts, was it because Elon Musk met a diversity quota? When Jeff Bezos landed government deals, was it because of his background? Or do we only ask that question when the CEO looks like me? Madeline's expression barely flickered. A pro. So you don't believe these diversity programs help? Darius folded his hands. They help level the playing field, he said, his voice gaining a bit of steel. But what people don't realize is, the playing field was never level to begin with. But Madeline wasn't done. Oh no, she had more up her perfectly tailored sleeve. Her smile sharpened, a glint of something cold in her eyes. Well, Darius, let's talk about that playing field you mentioned, she said, her tone shifting. You grew up in Birmingham, single mother, public school, worked your way up. Inspiring. Darius nodded slowly, sensing the trap. But here's what some might wonder, she continued, the question hanging in the air like a guillotine blade. How does someone with no Ivy League background, no deep family connections, go from a struggling neighborhood to securing contracts that billion-dollar corporations fail to land? The implication was clear. Did someone pull strings for you? Darius tilted his head, a slight, almost imperceptible movement. It's called work, Madeline, he said, his voice low and steady. Some of us don't have generational wealth or country club networks. So we build. But surely you had help along the way, she pressed, relentless. Yeah, Darius said, a quiet exhale escaping his lips. Help came in the form of working 3 jobs while getting my engineering degree. Help came in the form of sleeping in my office because I couldn't afford rent. That's the help I got. Her lips pressed together, just for a fraction of a second. The producers were locked in now. This was going to be interesting. Madeline shuffled her cards again. And yet, some would argue that black entrepreneurs today have more opportunities than ever before. Darius leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. You know what's funny? When a black business owner succeeds, people always ask what programs helped us. But nobody asks which old money bank funded a white-owned startup. Nobody asks which family connections got them into Stanford. He let that sink in. The truth is, success isn't handed out in some lottery. People like me had to be twice as good just to get a seat at the table. A shift in the room. A palpable tension. The audience was feeling it. Madeline, however, didn't blink. Instead, she smiled that predatory smile again. That's an interesting perspective, she said, her voice smooth as glass. But let's address another factor, perception. Oh, here we go. Some say, she continued, turning slightly toward the cameras, that black entrepreneurs get an unfair advantage when it comes to media attention, that the narrative of overcoming struggle is more marketable. A quiet chuckle escaped Darius, almost a scoff. Oh, so now it's too much attention? The sarcasm was practically a tangible thing, coding his words. You're telling me, in a world where white men make up, 90% of Fortune 500 CEOs, that the real problem is people like me getting a little bit of press? Madeline, smooth as ever, tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, a move he'd already learned to recognize as a stall tactic. I'm simply pointing out, she said, her voice carefully neutral, that in the current climate some perceive a pressure to prioritize diversity over objective merit. Merit, Darius echoed, the word feeling bitter, like a bad taste on his tongue. He flicked a glance at the cameras, a quick, almost imperceptible movement, before locking eyes with her again. Let me ask you something, Madeline. Do you honestly think, Madeline, that I'd be sitting here, across from you, on national television, if I wasn't absolutely at the top of my game? Her lips parted slightly, but before she could respond, he continued, the words flowing now, a torrent unleashed. You think I got here because I played the diversity card? Or do you think I got here despite everything designed to keep me out? Silence. Thick, heavy silence. But Madeline, she had one last card. The one designed to break him. She took a slow breath, a subtle shift in her seat. Darius, she said, tilting her head, her voice almost gentle. Do you think some of this outrage is exaggerated? After all, your success story proves that the system isn't as stacked against black entrepreneurs as some claim. The audacity. The sheer, unmitigated gall. Darius could feel the heat rising in his chest, but he kept his voice measured. It's funny, he said, a quiet chuckle escaping his lips. How people love to use one success story as proof that a problem doesn't exist. Madeline's smile stayed put, but her eyes, they flickered. He leaned forward. Let me put it this way. If one person climbs out of a burning building, do you point at them and say, see? The fire wasn't that bad? Madeline opened her mouth, hesitated, then closed it. The fact that I made it, Darius continued, his voice resonating with a quiet power, doesn't mean the system isn't broken. It just means I fought twice as hard to get through it. The studio crew had stopped moving. Statues. Madeline, scrambling for control, tried a different tack. I understand your perspective, she said, turning to the cameras, her voice adopting that carefully neutral tone. Damage control. Some might say your frustration isn't really about race, that it's about resentment toward larger corporations. Resentment? No, Darius said, shaking his head. Accountability? Absolutely. Then what do you say? Madeline pressed, her voice tight. To those who believe that in today's economy, success is based on hard work, not race? Darius exhaled, then locked eyes with her. This was it. The moment. I say, he began, his voice steady, unwavering, that people love to believe in fairy tales, when they're the ones benefiting from them. A ripple of silence. The kind that sticks to your ribs. But let's be real. He continued. Black entrepreneurs still get denied loans at twice the rate of white business owners. We still receive less than 2% of venture capital funding. And even when we prove ourselves, we still get asked whether we deserved our success. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. So let's stop pretending the system isn't rigged, he said, his voice calm but firm. It is. And the only people who don't see it are the ones it works for. Silence. Pure, heavy silence. The producers didn't cut. The control room didn't intervene. This was raw. Madeline shifted, finally, looking uncomfortable. Darius adjusted his watch, letting the silence linger. Then, he leaned back, a small, weary exhale escaping his lips. You know what the real problem is? He said, his voice quieter now, but somehow heavier. Madeline hesitated. What? The bar isn't in the same place for everyone. She shifted again. Meaning? I mean, Darius said, his voice laced with a quiet, controlled fury. A mediocre white man can fail upwards in this country. But a brilliant black man has to jump through flaming hoops just to get a shot. A producer off camera cursed under his breath. They knew. This was going viral. A white CEO can run a company into the ground, and somehow get hired somewhere else. Darius continued, the words pouring out now, unstoppable. Meanwhile, a black CEO has one bad quarter, and suddenly it's proof that we weren't ready for leadership. Madeline opened her mouth to respond, but he wasn't done. Not yet. And the best part? Darius chuckled, a dry, bitter sound. When we actually make it, people like you sit across from us and ask if we got here because of some special advantage. Silence. Madeline's jaw tightened. Darius leaned forward, just slightly. Not aggressive. Just firm. Just final. You wanted to talk about fairness? He said, a soft, bitter chuckle escaping his lips. Then let's start by telling the truth. Another silence. But this one was different. It wasn't discomfort anymore. It was impact. Madeline's expression had shifted. It wasn't just the audience watching Darius now. It was the entire country. And then, the moment. The one that would echo across the internet. Darius turned slightly, looking straight into the camera. I know what some of you all are thinking right now, he said, his voice calm, resonant. Some of you are nodding, because you've seen this, lived this. He let his gaze hold. And some of you are sitting there, frowning, arms crossed, telling yourself this isn't real, that I'm just playing victim, that it's all in my head. His lips pressed together for a second. But deep down, you know I'm right. The studio was silent. No one breathed. And then, all right, we need to take a quick break. The producer's voice crackled over the speakers. Madeline forced a polite smile. We'll be back with more after this. The cameras cut. But the damage was done. Within an hour, clips were everywhere. But the real storm, it was only just beginning. The clip, it exploded. By the time Darius was in his car, his phone was buzzing like a trapped hornet. Texts, calls, notifications, a flood. Twitter was on fire. Darius Bell just exposed the media's bias on live TV. This was powerful. #Truth hurts. The way he looked into the camera and called out America, chills. Darius Bell was right. But of course, not everyone saw it that way. Here we go again, another successful guy pretending to be oppressed. Cry me a river. Stop the victim mindset. Play the race card all you want, but hard work speaks louder. Merit matters. Cable news picked it up within the hour. He was brave. He was angry. He was everything. By lunchtime, the Morning Exchange released a statement. We value open dialogue, blah blah blah, stand by our commitment to fair conversations. Darius laughed when he read it. Fair. Right. Tasha called him, her voice a mix of laughter and exasperation. Do you realize you just set the internet on fire? Darius rubbed his temple. Wasn't exactly my plan. Well, congrats. You just became the most talked about entrepreneur in America. He didn't respond. He knew what came next. Viral moments don't stay moments. They become battlegrounds. And the next 48 hours, they were going to be messy. But this wasn't just about him anymore. By the next morning, the story had exploded. Cable news debates, opinion pieces, everyone had an angle. Fox News, is Darius Bell the new face of corporate entitlement? CNN, Darius Bell's viral moment, a reckoning for America's meritocracy? Business Insider, what Darius Bell's interview reveals about race and success in America. Madeline Royce, meanwhile, was in full damage control mode. On her show, she gave a carefully rehearsed response. I respect Mr. Bell, but I stand by my questions, my job as a journalist. Translation, she wasn't backing down. Darius watched from his office, shaking his head. Tasha sat across from him, scrolling through emails. You know, she said, we just got a flood of new investor inquiries. People want to work with us. Darius smirked. Let me guess, the same people who ignored us last year? Tasha shrugged. Guess being controversial is good for business. But it wasn't all sunshine and roses. Some clients pulled out. A major corporate partner suddenly decided to reevaluate their commitments. And then, the death threats. Emails, phone calls, even an unmarked package left outside Innovis headquarters. Nothing inside but a single sheet of paper. One word in bold enough. Tasha frowned as she read the message. You need security. Darius let out a slow breath, rubbing his temples. He knew this would come. Anytime a black man speaks too boldly, too truthfully, this is the cost. But backing down? Never an option. And now, he had a decision to make. Would he let the backlash silence him? Or was this just the beginning? Darius sat in his office, staring at the city skyline. The past 72 hours had been a whirlwind. Praise, hate, threats, opportunities. He thought about his younger self, that kid from Birmingham who had to fight for every inch. The one who watched doors slam shut while others waltzed through. And now, here he was. At the center of a national debate he never asked for. But one he couldn't ignore. Tasha entered, her expression unreadable. We just got an offer, she said. Darius raised an eyebrow. From who? She set a folder on his desk. A network. They want you to do a televised special. A one-on-one, deep dive. About race, business, the system. Darius exhaled. So, now they want to listen. Tasha smirked. Seems like it. Then, after a beat, what do you want to do? He leaned back in his chair, thinking. He could walk away. Let the noise die down. Get back to business. Or, he could use this moment. Not for clout. Not for attention. But to say the things nobody wanted to hear. Darius picked up the folder, flipping through the proposal. Then, he set it down. He looked at Tasha. Tell them I'll do it, he said, his voice firm. Her eyes widened slightly. You sure? He nodded. Yeah. But on my terms. Because if the system was going to put him under a spotlight, he was damn sure going to control the narrative. Darius Bell's viral moment. It wasn't just another internet controversy. It was a reckoning. It forced a conversation people had been dodging for decades. About race. About success. About who gets to rise without question, and who gets questioned when they rise. Some called him an activist. Some called him arrogant. Some called him right. But one thing was certain, nobody could ignore him anymore. And then, a final thought, a question to leave hanging in the air. So, what do you think? Does success mean playing by the rules of a broken system? Or does it mean rewriting the rules entirely? Let us know in the comments. And if you believe more stories like this need to be told, subscribe.